Hey everyone, we're gonna get started here in just a few minutes. We've got just about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. I'll jump back on here and get things started in just a moment. Thanks. All right, well, thanks again for everyone for attending today. Today we're going to be talking about designing a custom economic development data sheet or application. And we're going to be doing it with our software impact dashboard. We have impact dashboard, as many of you know, many of you using the actual software know that you can evaluate economic development projects, getting into the economic impacts and tax impacts. But a big piece of that is collecting the information from the prospect. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, is kind of setting up a template that'll allow you to kind of collect that information electronically and bring it into your system. And if you're not already using the software, feel free to reach out and talk to me. We have a couple different options. One would be, which will just include this kind of data form feature. And the other would be kind of the full suite of services running the full impact analysis on the other side of it. But to start things off, what I want to do is honestly just walk through the data form feature from the perspective of the prospect that'll be completing it. And as we go through the data form, we're going to kind of consider the types of things that we could do to change it or to edit it, and then Once we get through that data form the first time, we'll be able to see how we can go back into on our side on the as you're setting up this template and configure that. So just one thing to say here before we get going, we're going to send out an email with a video recording of this. If you have questions as we're going along, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And if you want to follow up with me afterwards, feel free to reach out, just paul@impactdatasource.com. So I'm going to jump over here to our actual data form wizard. So when you are going to share a link with a prospect, or you could even put a link on your website for a prospect to, you could say, send us your data. They're going to click on that link and they're going to go to a page that looks like this. Now, on this welcome page, as we call it, we have our branding. This is my kind of generic Economic Development Corporation logo. This could have your branding on it. As we configure our template or our data form, as we're designing this, we can put a welcome message here. So kind of a custom welcome message to say whatever we'd like, explaining why we're collecting this information and how we're going to use it, whatever you want to say. And then we can assign a point of contact. So if someone were to be filling this data form out and they have a question, they could reach out to a point of contact there. So this is the very first screen when they, like I say, when they click that link to start filling out the data form, they'll land on this welcome screen. Once they hit get started, we're going to collect 3 pieces of information from them before we do anything else. We want to get to know their name, their email address, so we can communicate with them. And then as just a point of reference for us, kind of what their role is at the company. And so I'm going to put this in, and I'll actually just put in my, Paul. I'll actually put my last name. We can do that. And then I will put my email address. And actually we'll put paul@impactdatasource.com. So put that email address. And then I'm just going to say that I am an employee of the business, right? And so these 3 fields, this is an important piece, these 3 fields are the only required fields throughout the entire analysis. So later, if we ask them, do you expect to have visitors to your facility and will they generate hotel nights? If they don't have hotel nights, they can leave it blank and it doesn't matter. That passes through as a 0. But in order to get past this screen, we need to have responses to each one of these fields. So they need to give us something that looks like a name, something that looks like an email address, and then make a selection on that dropdown. If they don't do that, they're not going to be able to hit this next button, and it'll just tell them, please fill out all of the fields. I'll hit next here. And as I do that, I will get notified. I should get notified that we're saving the responses as we go. So we were on that welcome screen, then we gave our information, and now we're on our 3rd screen, which is kind of helping us decide some of the branching. And so here we want to understand if the prospect's project represents a brand new business to our community, or whether it's an expansion, or excuse me, I should say, whether it's an existing business that already currently operates in the community. So they can select here whichever one applies. So they could say it's a brand new business, or they could say it's an existing business. I'm going to keep things simple for right now, and we're going to say that it's a new business. But I want to just show you as I'm doing this, so to help you get the context, this is kind of our flow chart that we put together for this. So we have this kind of welcome area, and then we want to know the business type. And is that a new business or an existing business? In our case, we're gonna walk through this data form with just a new business. So that means we're going to go over here and we're going to collect a series of inputs related to the project specifics. So the jobs, the salaries, capital investment, those sorts of things. And then from there, we get down here to ask about some of the supporting details we might want to collect. So there are some additional questions you could ask. You could ask them to upload documents. We'll get into all of this as we work through here. And then ultimately, we'll gather some details about the company behind the project. And then they have the ability to review all of their responses kind of in a summarized format, and then they can hit submit. But you can see if we were at this business type question and we went to, and we indicated that it was an existing business, we would have a series of questions related to their current operations. So in economic development terms, it's kind of like the retained jobs, their existing property, and that sort of thing. And then we'd ask them if they have plans for an expansion, whether they're going to hire more workers or add more property and so forth. And so if they say yes to that, we're going to go through a series of questions around the expansion specifics. And then finally routing back here to getting supporting details. And if they didn't have an expansion, we would skip that whole section here and just jump straight to our supporting detail and so on. So that's kind of at a high level where we're going. Within each one of these blue boxes, we have a series of questions that can be asked. And so we're kind of going to see that as we click next on this next screen. So here we're going to say that it's a new business. So that's going to take us the right direction now for us. So we can see now we're in kind of our main data form wizard. We can see we've got our branding up here again. If I click on this, it'll pull up my contact information. So again, if someone has questions as they're filling this out, they can always hit that logo or right there on the contact, and it'll pull up the point of contact there. This will be your contact information. So essentially this is my test account, so it has my name there, but this would be, if someone has a question filling out your data form, it would have your contact information there. We're going to see how we can configure all of these things as we get into it, but we're just kind of laying the framework here as we walk through from the perspective of the prospect there. We can also see I've got this one, it's called ED Corporation Incentive Application. So I've got a name associated with this data form. And we can also see we have a save and come back button. And so if I were to click that, it's just going to ask me to confirm my email address, and it'll send me an email with a link to get back to this thing. We're always going to be saving it the whole time, but it can give, make people feel better if they can have that save and come back button. So we'll clear that off of there. So we're here just kind of getting a sense of our navigation on this left-hand side. We have questions about the project. These include things like their plans, the timeline, the site, square footage, and so forth. And we see all of these different sections that we're going to go through. And then ultimately, you can see the other kind of the big categories like we were just discussing. So if we kind of collapse that one down, we see project, supporting details, company, and review. And that corresponds to kind of our branching that we have here: project specific, supporting details, company info, and review. And so that's where we're headed with this. As I mentioned, there are a series of questions on each one of these, which as we design our own data form, we're using our impact dashboard, we can indicate whether or not we want to ask this question or give different options and so forth. And so for this, for plans, we're asking, does the project involve leasing or owning property? And then we have some different options, whether or not we're going to be leasing or whether we're going to purchase some land and build a new building, for example. We can put all of that in there. So we might say, let's just say for this one, we're going to do a lease space, build to suit. And let's say it pops up here and says lease term in years, if applicable. We could say maybe 7-year lease, right? And so they can fill this out as they're going. If they hit next, we're going to jump down to that next section on our project inputs. Now it's asking for our timeline. So first off, it wants to know the date that we plan to break ground or begin operation or renovations. And so we can just put something, we'll just make things up here as we go along. We can put the date we begin local operations. Maybe we'll say January 2023, right? And I'll hit next. Again, if you're not concerned about the timeline, let's say that's a question, you're looking at this and you've got, oh my goodness, we've got so many different inputs. I don't care about the timeline for our purposes. Let's just collect the more relevant things like jobs, for example. We could remove this question from our data form. We're going to see how we can customize that data form in just a moment, but we're just trying to get a sense of what's on here. Now we ask about the site. We can put a specific address if we know a particular address. We can also allow them to put to give this text box where we can ask them for any special site requirements. So they might need certain utilities, or they might need certain access to rail or highways or whatever it might be. And so they can, this can be a field that can collect that information. Again, we don't need to put in every piece of information. So if I skip this, we can kind of just let it go. It's going to let us jump to that next section. Now we want to understand the square footage. Again, if you're not interested in some of this information, we're going to be able to remove some of these questions, as we'll see later. So maybe they're going to be, let's just make something up here. Let's see that they want 50,000 square feet of manufacturing space. Just throwing some numbers in there. You can see this is helping us identify the square footage by use type. So that can be handy, just kind of understanding as this information comes into you. Next up, we have a section for products and industry. So we can get relatively detailed here. So we want to be clear in general that we want to understand the service or product to be produced at the local site. You might clarify just to understand the main service or product that the company produces kind of company-wide, and then seeing the NAICS code. You might just ask them for the NAICS code here and not, you can remove these questions, for example. We'll talk about removing certain questions. The big idea here would be if you're talking to Toyota, an auto manufacturer, they might be putting their headquarters, but the main thing that they do is auto manufacturing. And so if they put the NAICS code that they're an auto manufacturer, that might technically be right. But what we're more interested in understanding, at least from an impact analysis standpoint, is understanding what they're going to be doing at the local site. So if you can kind of catch them at this stage and they'll tell you what they're doing actually locally, you might be able to go in later and understand and modify that NAICS code if necessary. But in our case, I'm just going to put something in here. I'll put in my NAICS code for farm machinery and equipment manufacturing. You can, with this drop down, we can select a specific NAICS code. Like you can see, I've typed in a 6-digit NAICS code. Or if we know, we don't know the actual number, but we know it's farm machinery, we can start typing and it'll search through all the NAICS codes there for us. So we're going to make that selection here as we're trying to, again, we're collecting this information to try to really understand the ins and outs of the project, and ultimately, in most cases, be able to run an impact analysis on it. And that's going to be an important number for us, or an important field for us. I'm going to hit next here. We're just working our way down this left-hand side. Now we want to know how many jobs will the project create. So in this case, we can see we've got a 5-year phase in. So we could say, okay, I'm going to create 50 jobs in year 1 and 50 jobs in year 2. So for a total of 100 jobs. If I hit next here, we're going to be asking about the average annual salary that these workers will make. So I'm going to, again, just making up some numbers, plug in like $65,000 per year. And then we could say that it increases at a certain percentage, and then I don't have to type in all of those. Or if we know that it doesn't necessarily go by a strict percentage, we could type in these values and use those numbers directly. Now, another way that we could ask for this job and salary information would be kind of in a table like this, where you might ask for the specific positions or occupations. And so in something like this, you might have, laborers, and you're going to have, 95 laborers. You're going to have managers. You're going to have 4 of those, and you can imagine how all this works out, right? And so it doesn't necessarily, you can see we're going to keep a running total of the workers and the kind of the overall average salary that we see there. And so you could, if you're interested in collecting the information in a little bit more detail like this, rather than just the total head count, we could get it this way and actually even calculate our overall annual salary. So you can use either, or you could use either option there for yourself as you're putting together your own data form. If I hit next, we can have a question about benefits. And so they can indicate, the types of benefits they offer, the value of those benefits, and then even if you want to describe eligibility for those benefits. Some of our clients will have requirements, maybe to be eligible for an incentive, they have to provide certain benefits, and they have to be available to people within 90 days or something like that. And so if they're trying to confirm that information is true, you might put that on your data form just to kind of get that from the prospect as well. Again, if benefits is not something you're interested in, or you don't want to ask this question, we're going to be able to take that type of question off. Now I've got our next input is for capital investment. Here we're looking at just trying to understand if there's going to be some value of land we want to consider, as well as maybe some sort of construction aspect to this. So I'm making up numbers here, but I'm just going to throw in $5 million for a building and $1 million for FF&E here. And you can see if they're going to make additional investments over time, they could capture that here through the first 5 years. If I hit next, we have an input here for inventories. My test account here for Economic Development Corporation is located in Texas, and so inventories are still subject to tax. If you're in a state that doesn't tax inventories, you're not even going to see this question, so it won't be something to be concerned about. But if it applies, if inventories are taxable in your state, you're going to see an input for collecting information about inventories potentially. Next up, we have details about taxable purchases and taxable sales that the company might be responsible for. So again, if a business is going to have locally taxable sales or taxable purchases that are subject to local The sales tax rate, that's something we want to capture. This kind of corresponds with that last input with inventories. Again, Texas has a local sales tax rate in most communities. And so this is a relevant input for us. If you're in a state that doesn't have a local sales tax, you wouldn't see this type of input coming through as you're putting your data form together. Next up, if we have an input for hotel nights and visitors, here we're just trying to be able to capture some visitor impact. So if we think about maybe this new facility is going to drive some local hotel nights in our community, we can capture the number of those hotel nights, the average daily rate kind of at that hotel, and then if there'll be some other kind of general visitor spending throughout the community per hotel night. And so we can see that is available to us here. Now, if I hit next, we're going to go to our next section here that we see for project background. This is under our supporting details banner. And this is just basically an open input for us that we can provide any additional background that would be helpful in reviewing the project. And that's pretty generic and kind of a vanilla, prompt here. But this is, again, something that you'll have control over as you configure your own and you design your own data form. You'll be able to put whatever prompt that you'd like here in this. So, for example, you might ask them, what incentive are you applying for? And how does it, meet the city's requirements or whatever it might be, right? So you could ask them a very custom question here that they can respond to with a text response. And next up, we have a place where they can upload documents to you. So this would be, as it says here, it says, please attach supporting documentation that may be helpful in reviewing the project. An alternative one that you could put in, again, this is customizable text that we would be able to go in there and maybe say, please upload your site plan and hiring schedule, whatever specific documents and details you would want them to provide to you. You can request them here and then they can upload them and attach them, essentially like attaching them to an email almost. So those are our two supporting details sections. Next up, we have a spot for company info. And so we're going to get the name of the company here. So the somewhat nice thing that was very intentional about this is with our data form, as we created it, we wanted to make it responsive so that, like we've looked at here, that if someone is telling you it's a new business or in its existing business, we want to give them the opportunity to enter in the information that's relevant. So on a PDF, if you think about, the PDF data sheets that you have, very often you have to have fields for the retained jobs, for example, or the total jobs. And it can get confusing for a prospect if they're, putting in information about their kind of new project, but they're not understanding the input for retained jobs. And you get duplicated things, and it obviously makes it difficult to interpret as you receive that if you have to have a single PDF that you share with all of your prospects. When it's dynamic like this, we can kind of have the flow kind of go as it's appropriate. And the other thing that we've done as we put this together is to really focus on the project first. We want to understand what's going on with the project. And then later we're going to ask about the company. Again, very often with the static data forms that I see when clients will have those completed and they might send them to us to prepare an impact study, you can tell in the data form that there's confusion between, am I giving you information about my company or about this particular project? Sometimes that's one and the same, but usually a company is going to have a couple different locations perhaps, and you'll see the initial responses being confused between the company or the project, right? So we make a focus on the project itself up front, and then later at the end, we come back in and say, hey, tell me about your company behind the project. And so this is where we can put in the company name, XYZ Co. We can say, is it confidential, yes or no? We can indicate where the headquarters is. If there's a parent company involved, we get the website, just information that you might want to have if you're trying to, do some background checks on this company that's got the project. If I hit next here, we're going to have fields that we can collect about when the company was established, where they were established, what their business structure is. We can see different options here, and whether or not they're a public company or a private company. We can also ask them about their employment, their kind of employment distribution across the world, really. So trying to understand in this sense, how many workers they have currently employed in the state or in the US or worldwide. And knowing those numbers will help you kind of understand how big this project is relative to the company overall. So if they're hiring 100 workers, but they have 800,000 workers worldwide, we can get a context to how significant, let's say, this project is. We could say significant to the company worldwide, or even within our state. If this is 100 workers, but they have only 5 workers in the state already, this is a pretty big expansion, let's say, into our state. So this, again, can be helpful in trying to understand the context of the size of the project for this company. And then finally, we're going to ask the point of contact information. We've already gathered a name and an email address. We kind of pull these in from that initial screen, and then we can ask for a title and a phone number just so we collect a little bit more information. And again, we don't need to, as a prospect of filling this out, we don't need to fill in every field, and it'll just pass through as a blank if that's how we leave it. And then if we hit that final next button, we're going to go to a kind of a review and submit page where we will repeat back all of the information that the prospect has told us about the project, and they can edit it right on this screen if they need to. So for example, we can see now we're repeating back that this is a new business to the community. They're going to lease space. That's going to be a lease length of 7 years. Here's their timeline. We haven't given us particular address. If we wanted to go back and say that they're considering a site at a particular place, we could put 123 Main Street, let's say here, or 6th Street. And we can edit it right from this page. We don't have to go all the way back up and find the input that was going to have that. We can see it right here on the screen. And so we can see all of the highlighted pieces, the bold pieces of information are kind of calling out the information that was entered. And we can see that we didn't submit any background or no uploaded documents and so forth. But this is a nice, really easy way for them to kind of summarize and make sure, really confirm that they understood the question and that they responded to each one of those questions. So as they see it here, they'll be able to say, okay, yep, 100 jobs, 65,000 a year, perfect. And if they're ready to go, they can print this off if they need to, and say, we say print, but you can save a PDF. So just as easy as printing it, I suppose, but saving it electronically. You can also, if you notice up here, we have a data summary view, and then we also have a raw data view. So if you wanted to, you could print this off as well. And this would be showing every single field that the prospect had the ability to enter. But typically we're going to just do that data summary. If I click submit and send, it's going to notify the prospect that once they submit this data form, they won't be able to make any more changes to it. And that's really what we want, right? We want them to send this in and commit to those numbers. If they do need to make changes to it, they would need to contact you, and from your side, you would be able to go in and make adjustments. So if they submit this and initially they were expecting to create 100 jobs, later they come back and tell you, hey, we're actually going to hire 120 jobs. That would be something that you would communicate about, and you could change as you start analyzing the project, but it isn't something that they would be able to go back in and modify on their own. So as I hit submit, we're going to notice that my data form, I get a little thank you, I can hit done. Now my data form is read only. Essentially, we can click around, we can look at everything, we can go back to different sections, but now we can see I can't actually click on anything. I can't make any more changes. And if I need to talk to anybody, I can reach out, contact the organization that way. Now, we're going to switch over and we're going to look at, so that was the prospect working through this. And now I want to go to my actual account. So this is my impact dashboard model. I'm going to, since we weren't on this earlier, we'll refresh the page. We're going to see that I get another data form in my inbox. We can see this one from May 18th today from Paul at impactdatasource.com. So I can go in now from my side and actually view the responses that the prospect provided. So this is kind of giving me that summary, so I can get that quick summary of what they've responded. And if I keep scrolling down, I'll see every single field that the prospect provided to me. And if I need to, I could even print this out and save it, as sometimes you do. Typically, what you're going to do, though, is create a new project with this and then use that information to evaluate your project. We're going to stop right here and put a pin in that. We can come back to it, but I want to talk about how we can actually configure this template. So we've been looking at this example all the way through, and we can go back now And on this, in our account, on this left-hand side navigation under data forms, we can click on templates. And on templates, in my case, I have a couple different versions. You might not need more than one. Yet very often a client will just have one data form. It'll be the data form for your community. And so I'm going to use this one here because this is the one we were working through, calling it the full data form. If I click on this, this is going to be how we can design and configure that data form. We can see the different options here. We can configure it. We can preview it if we want to see it in that wizard format, or we can try to kind of get the PDF version of it, although I don't really recommend the PDF version here, just because it is nice to have it dynamic. But so on the configure screen, what we can see here is we have different sections and questions and fields that can be edited. So for example, we can see here our display title says ED Corporation Incentive Application. And this was that label that we saw throughout every field of that data form wizard that was just saying, this is, hey, this is our incentive application. It might be, you might just change it to say, ED project data sheet or something like that. Whatever terminology you want to use for it, if you want to call it your incentive application, that's a way to do it. Now you can also make a point of contact throughout this data form. So if someone's filling out this particular, a data form based off of this particular template, they will follow up or be directed to contact one of your users from your account. So I have a couple different users within my account, and I can select whoever I'd like it to be at the point of contact there. If I scroll down on this, we're just going to walk through each one of those sections, just as we saw it here in this flow chart. We have the welcome section, the project specifics, supporting details, company info, review. We're going to go through each one of those sections, and we'll be able to edit the pieces of information that are relevant here. So for example, on the welcome text, we can put in a custom message here, just explaining we're going to use this data sheet to run an impact analysis on your project. If you have questions, reach out to me directly. And so that's the type of thing that you can put here on the welcome screen. This contact will be shown kind of below that welcome text on the first page of the data form. And if you need to, like I mentioned, if you want to be previewing this as you go, you can kind of click through it here and see you're in this preview, and you can see kind of what your data form looks like as you go along. We'll go back to our configure screen here, the welcome text. You don't really have any, you really can't change anything around that. Let's get started with the basics, asking for those pieces of information. And then this branching, whether it's an existing business or a brand new business, we don't have anything to modify there. You won't have control over those fields. Those are kind of locked in. But then as we scroll down here, as we get into details about the project, we might not want to ask the question about the company's plans, what they're doing. This was the question of whether they're going to lease space, build a new building, or whatever it might be. So if you didn't want to ask this question, you were trying to trim it down and make like a short version of this and maybe just collect the details on the hiring, number of jobs and salaries, you could remove this section. So we've got a checkbox here that'll remove that whole series of inputs related to your plans. Same thing with timeline. For example, you don't want to ask them when they're going to break ground or begin operations. We could remove that. Around the site, we had an input for the address and then any special site requirements. Again, if this was something you didn't want to ask, you didn't want to bother them with at an early stage, for example, you could remove that as part of your template here. Square footage, same thing. If you wanted to remove it, you could. Products and industry here. This is the one where we made it a little more complicated or more comprehensive than it might need to be. So you might just say, hey, actually, I only want to ask about the NAICS code. So I can kind of deselect specific questions on a section and just leave the one relevant question that you want to ask. Then as you come down here, we have our jobs and salaries. We also have that alternative way to do the job and salary detail. This was the one where we could put the occupation, the number of employees, and the average salary per worker and calculate things out that way. So again, you can modify and indicate which things you want to include, which ones aren't relevant for you. As I mentioned, the inventories and taxable purchases and taxable sales are relevant to me based on my state, based on being in Texas in this case. Inventories are subject to property tax, and most communities do have a local sales tax. So we're seeing these here. Again, if you're in like a state like, let's say, Pennsylvania, inventories are not subject to tax, and really there's only the state sales tax in most areas, you're not going to see inputs like this. And then we have our hotel nights and visitors. Again, we're going to be able to indicate whether or not we want to bother with that. Sometimes I know we have some of our clients in the, for example, in the DFW Metroplex, hotel nights tend to be kind of an important one that they like to ask about and understand the number of hotel nights a particular project might drive. But for some of our other clients, this is maybe just another screen that they don't need to put in front of their client or to the prospect. So as I keep scrolling down now, this is where we get to our supporting details inputs. This is, as I mentioned, where we could provide a custom prompt. So we might ask what incentive, and again, you can kind of write a little bit more detail than this, but what incentive are you applying for, something like that. And you might also change this to say, please upload your site plan and hiring schedule, and change these prompts so that they're relevant to what you want to ask. And as we scroll down here, we have all of these fields relating to the company, and you have the option to kind of deselect specific questions if you don't, or even get rid of the entire section if you don't want to ask certain things. So for example, the employment distribution, maybe you don't want to show that. And then finally, you can put a little bit of custom thank you text, and maybe even direct them back to your website, for example. And all of these changes here will be live for you as you are making them here. So again, we could preview it, or we could kind of just fill out the whole thing again. So the way that you would, so just to, I'll back up a quick step. The way that you would share a data form template with someone, so you configure your template and then you're able to share it with prospects. So if you're working with someone and you just want to send them an email, you can send them an email right here. Just click in there, put in the email address of the person you're working with. You can customize the subject, you can customize the message here, and then you can even indicate, who is sending this. And if you're logged in, as in my case, I'm logged in as myself, I could say it's coming from me, or I can actually say it's coming on behalf of someone else if I wanted to. So this would be a way to send an email from Impact Dashboard to the prospect. If you really just want to grab the reusable link, this link is, for example, the link that you could post on your website. And every time someone fills out a data form, they will get a new iteration. Every time they click on this link, they'll get a new iteration of that data form. So I'm going to start this again, and hopefully if everything's working properly, we're going to see some of those changes get incorporated here. So I'll put all DataSource, and then we'll just put something there. So now this one, I'm going to actually say it's an existing business. So we'll get to see kind of that other version of it, as I mentioned, this branching and so forth. So when we hit next here, we're going to ask questions about the company's current operations. So we have this other section here, and we ask, is there an expansion and so forth. So again, as we were looking at it earlier, we have our data form wizard flow chart. In this case, I said it was an existing business. So we have a series of fields related to the current operations. Then we can get into whether or not there's an expansion planned, and then continue from there. So here, because we're asking about the company's current operations, we're clarifying, hey, tell us about the current operations. How much space do you currently occupy? So here's a square footage question. Next up, we ask about their NAICS code for their current activity. Then we have the jobs and salaries. Because this is their current operations, we're just asking for the number of existing employees. So this would be like you typically think about those retained jobs. So let's put 50 jobs at $50,000 a year. We can put in the market value of their current property. So the property that they currently support on the tax rolls, we can leave that. Let's just skip that one. And then we can also capture like taxable purchases or taxable sales at their current level. And then finally, in this section, we ask, do you plan to hire more workers or make additional capital investments? And so typically it's one of those business retention and expansion projects that'll be the business is planning an expansion. And so we'll say yes to this. And as I hit next, we're going to go through the series of questions related to the expansion. And as you see here, we've got a lot fewer fields that were being requested. And that's again, because I've made changes to my data form. I've eliminated a bunch of these sections, but we have included, as you see here, square footage, products and industry, jobs and salaries. So as you see that here, we see that those are the fields being requested as we go down here. I won't run through this thing all again, but we can see that the things that we've modified have come through here. What incentive are you applying for? And then here we were asking for specific things to be uploaded and so forth. So this is the way that you're going to be able to configure things. You can think of it, so as you're noticing, as you are noticing probably, we have a structure in place along with this kind of data form flow chart that's here, and you're able to enable or disable specific questions and sections. But the question sometimes comes up is, can I add a really unique question or a special question that isn't kind of in this library of questions and that we want to include in our community, for example? And the answer to that is really, you would need to capture it here with some of these supporting details. So if it's a series of questions, you might create a supplemental document that you ask them to download and then attach as they're filling out the rest of the data form. So if it's a series of questions that are very unique to your community and you want to be able to capture the responses, it would have to be done kind of as a addendum, so to speak. We don't have at this point with the data form feature as it exists right now, we don't have the ability to add a custom field or custom input here. So you could, imagining that, you might be expecting to be able to create a new section under the project and have a series of questions you might want to ask about a particular topic. It would have to be done kind of, as I mentioned, on an addendum, kind of where they could attach some documents. So that's just something to be aware of. As I mentioned, when we got into this, we have the concept here is that we would create a template. That template could be shared with the prospects that are filling out the data form. And so you don't need to create an individual template for each project. You can see I just say, the full data form, this one represents our incentive application, right? And that means that anytime you have a project come up, you could put in the prospect's email address and send them this data form. Or again, we have the option for you to use this link and post this link on your website. So you might put a big send us your data button on your website. And then when anyone has a project, you can direct them to your website to click on the button and it'll walk them through this data form wizard and collect the information. As the user, so as you configure your data form and then prospects start completing data forms, you're going to get notified at a couple different stages. So if you were to send an email to someone, so if you're sending a data form to someone like this and you hit send, it's going to copy you on that email. You'll see that the prospect was sent the email and exactly what was said there. So you'll be copied on this email. When the prospect begins filling out the data form, when they put in their email address, kind of in the early stage, I'll go back here. When they put in their email address here, you're going to get notified that someone started filling out the data form. So maybe you send the email to the prospect on Monday, they don't start filling it out until Wednesday. Well, when they get to this screen here and they put in their contact information, you'll be notified that someone has started filling out the data form, and it'll tell you the name and the email address that they put in here. Same thing with if you put a data form on your website, behind that button that says send me your data, when someone clicks on that link and when they put in their email address here and they click next, you'll get notified that someone has begun completing a data form. Now, the really cool thing about the system is that you're able to follow along and see what the prospects are putting as they go along. So we have this inbox area, which of course, if we'll come back to it in just a minute, but when someone submits a data form, it'll come into your inbox. But you'll also have a section for data forms that are in progress. And so again, we can see this data form that I just started a few moments ago. is partially complete, I guess. And if I was a nosy, impatient person, I could click on this and see exactly what they filled out so far. They've told me under their current operations, they have 50 people and they pay $50,000 a year. It doesn't look like that prospect has filled out very much else yet. But you're able to kind of keep track and follow along as people are filling out the data form. You can also use this share link for a particular data form, for example. If let's say that it's been a few days, maybe it's been a week, and I want to just kind of nudge this person to come back and finish filling out the rest of their data form, you can click on here, and you can get this kind of custom email that asks them to complete the data request. And again, you can customize this to say, hey, I saw you were started filling out the data form. Are there any questions that you have for me? Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, that sort of thing. If you just wanted to get a link to that very, very specific URL, let's say that they pretty much filled out 99% of it and they told you, hey, I'm done, but they didn't actually hit the link, hit the submit button, you'd be able to do that on their behalf. You could actually go here, grab this link that goes out to their specific data form, and then you'd be able to hit that button, so to speak, to send it and submit the data form. So it is really nice to have this kind of visibility into seeing what prospects have, how many have started and when they started, when they last updated it, and where they are in the process. Now, as I mentioned, when they submit a data form, as I did earlier in the demo here, you're going to see it come into your inbox. From here, as I mentioned, you can click on it. You'll be able to view the data form just as they, kind of filled it out. You'll see the summary as well as every input. We can save that if we need to keep a version of it. But we can also create a project for this. And so if I wanted to create a new project and kind of use the next step here really is to create an impact analysis off of this, we can click create a new project. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it Project May. We've got this little checkbox here, creating a scenario using the data. So we're gonna create the project folder, so to speak, and then we're gonna create the scenario where we can start evaluating it. And so as we do that, we're gonna kind of step through a few things. It's going to take the information that the prospect provided in that data form, and it's going to paste it into our model. So again, for most of our impact dashboard clients using our model, they've got the full impact capabilities here, and they're able to evaluate the impact of the project really with just a click of a button. As we see, we can confirm a few inputs here, and we can see everything's coming together for us. And really, like I say, with just a click of a button, we're creating this scenario. We can see the impact calculated in our case now for the city of Arlington. We can see the benefits that this project generates and the costs as well as the net benefits. If I click over to my reports just quickly, we can see I have this fact sheet where I've summarized a good bit of the information that we've received in that data form. So the company name is confidential. They actually didn't tell us any of these other pieces of information. If you remember, I didn't fill all of this out. If we wanted to, we could go back in and fill some of it out. Clicking here, this is where kind of on your side, maybe if you go research the company, you could find when they were established, where they were established, and what their stats are there, and kind of add more details. But we can see we've got the NAICS code, the amount of square footage, they're going to be leasing a facility, here's their timeline, all the information that we've collected about it. We can also add sections here talking about, adding a description. So whatever text we might want to add here, we'll add sections to the report that can get added here. I haven't really filled out a whole lot here, but you can see the concept. If I hit summary report, this is where we're doing our main impact analysis. So, we're taking the 100 jobs, estimating the spin-off activity and so forth, and translating it into revenues and costs for the city. So kind of all of these pieces are working together. I'm not going to get too far into the details here about the impact modeling and so forth, but we're able to use this data form feature to collect the information about a prospective project, and then from there very easily make be able to calculate the impact of a project. as I mentioned, we do kind of have two tiers. The kind of pro version, so to speak, the kind of higher level is what we're looking at right now with being able to evaluate the detailed impacts. Some of our clients would really just have the what we call Impact Dashboard Essentials, where you have this data form feature that we've been looking at. And then you can create a project fact sheet for it. And so I'll show you an example where we have like a fact sheet that's a little bit more filled out. It would really just be generating a report, something like this. So this project fact sheet, this one summarizes a project in our represents a recruitment in our advanced manufacturing industry. They're considering a particular site. Here's a bunch of details about the company. We did some due diligence on the CEO and so forth. We put a summary there. We've got our description of what's going on, discussing some of the other community benefits and our recommendation. So this fact sheet is really just repeating the information that we've collected. And this part is still a part of the Impact Dashboard Essentials. Then when you get into the summary reports and the impact analysis side of things, that's where you get into the second tier. But as I mentioned, the data form feature and then this fact sheet is all a part of Impact Dashboard Essentials. If you have any questions, I'll certainly stick around for any questions. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you want help setting up your own. I know there's a lot of folks here currently have access to Impact Dashboard. If you don't, and you're interested in kind of that, at least as a starting point, the Impact Dashboard Essentials, if you just reach out to me, I can set you up with an account there just to see how you like it. And at least for the first year, we'll kind of make it a free Impact Dashboard Essentials account. Again, doesn't include all of the impact modeling, but it does get you this data form feature that we've been talking about and customizing today. Makes it really nice for interacting with prospects, as I mentioned, and improving that static data form that sometimes generates more questions than answers when you receive it. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I'm going to wrap it up here. We'll get this video out to you tomorrow, and I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thanks so much.